Well, just
But
the one piece of jargon you threw at me, the FOMO, I was like, I've never heard
and that's
that.
not even investment.
Oh,
That's
okay.
like millennial. That's some kind of
True.
millennial thing. I mean,
Maybe I missed the boat on that one, but
I felt kind of hip saying it myself.
well, I felt really old when you explained it to me. Hi, I'm Kyle Weckerly, certified professional ghostwriter. I'm glad you're listening as I welcome industry experts to share stories. You'll hear of lessons learned the hard way, overcoming professional hurdles, turning experience into actionable knowledge, and how to connect with your target audience. This is the Career Challenges Podcast. Welcome to the Career Challenges Podcast, and my guest for this episode is Stacy Havener. And Stacy Havener is a blue-collar girl from the Berkshires who combined a lot of grit with a little glitter to become a successful entrepreneur in the investment world. Born in the 70s, survivor of the 80s, and still in love with the 90s, she's obsessed with all things old school, hip-hop music, classic cars, and vintage furniture. Before Stacy made a career raising over $8 billion for fund companies, she was an award-winning writer who dreamed of becoming a literature professor. Ironically, her love of storytelling and passion for teaching helped build a woman-run empire in a male-dominated industry. Growing up the only girl on an all-boys soccer team, it's no surprise she's now an entrepreneur in one of the toughest boys' clubs. At the heart of it all, there's one thing Stacy believes in: underdogs. To her, there's nothing like helping someone turn an inkling of an idea into the reality of success. Stacy is the founder, CEO at Havener Capital Partners, a sales and marketing agency that represents undiscovered funds from some of the world's leading asset managers. Havener is on a mission to level the playing field in mutual funds. So, Stacy, welcome to the Challenges Podcast.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for having me. This is great.
Yeah, so just that bio alone sparks a lot of questions for me. And so I do want to start at the beginning here. You say you're a blue-collar girl.
Yes.
So explain to me, your blue-collar background.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. The Berkshires, it's a beautiful place in Massachusetts, if anyone's been there. The 413, that's the area code. But I grew up in Pittsfield. My family was, policemen, firemen, electricians, certainly nobody that worked in the investment world. My mom didn't go to college. My dad did. He was a math teacher. I think what's interesting being in this space oftentimes, and especially since the theme of your podcast is about careers, many people are sort of born into investments. Their parents worked there. Their father was a portfolio manager, or they studied it in school. And I did neither of those things. And as I was sharing with you before we kind of went live here, it took me years to realize that that was actually an advantage.
Yes, definitely. I do want to circle back to that, but you said you didn't grow up in investing. So what did you do in school? And then what was your motivation for doing that? And then, of course, what brought you to investing? I know that's a lot of questions.
That's great. So I grew up loving to read. I still do.
All the time. I've got so many books I need to read.
Obsessed. And in fact, one thing that's kind of interesting, I collect vintage typewriters.
Awesome.
And when I was really little, I used to take books and open them and retype them. And I'm not sure what I thought was going to happen there, if I was like by osmosis going to learn how to be a great writer or something, but that was my Saturday morning activity.
Awesome.
But I also was a soccer player, and that's relevant because it's actually how I got into the investment business. But in college, I studied literature. I wanted to be a professor, as you said. I wrote poetry. That was really my vibe. But I also, being blue collar, had to pay for my own school, which I did for my undergrad. And as I got ready to embark on my graduate program, I also had to pay for that. My high school soccer coach, we had stayed in touch, and he knew I was gonna have to pay for school, and he offered me a job. And of course, like when you're in high school, your soccer coach, you think that's their job. Right? But really they have a day job. Yeah. And his day job was that he ran $1 billion small cap portfolio. And he wanted to launch a fund. So he asked me if I wanted to join him, to which I said, I mean, I'd love to, but I know nothing about investing or stocks. And he said, I'll teach you. And so I took the leap with the intention of going back to grad school. And I never left because as it turns out, stories aren't only in books, they're in business, and they're everything to business. And I just loved the opportunity to tell stories in a different way than I had studied.
Awesome. Yeah, because I had read How to Build a Story Brand by Donald Miller, and he combines the monomyth with marketing and branding. But I get the real vibe from him, and I've been listening to his podcast as well, that using story in your marketing and branding is kind of a new thing. I mean, not new in that they've just come up with it, but that it's starting to take over. So I'm curious from your perspective of somebody who obviously knows how to really write a good story, because you have awards in it and everything. What was that like for you, starting to utilize story in your job and in the investment space? And was it really a new thing there in your experience?
Yeah, great question. The answer is it absolutely was a new thing. I think it still is. So in investments, and I think it makes sense, right? Investments really, this is a group that speaks in numbers, right? Yeah. They report in numbers, their performance is numbers, their exposures, their statistics that are relevant to any investor, it's all numbers. And so what's interesting, as somebody coming in whose background is more in words, is combining those two. So telling stories in the investment world, I think the perception from most fund managers is that the investor doesn't care.
Oh.
And they're so wrong.
Really?
Because at the end of the day, and it's not just for investments, but for any business, at the end of the day, it's just people. And people care about people. Yeah. And those stories are how you connect and how you resonate and how you, to use a very tired phrase, how you build a relationship. And so, the numbers are important. But really at the heart of it is the story. And so it's been everything to me. And it's even interesting when you sit with a fund manager who's very successful, they manage billions of dollars, they're incredibly wealthy, they're very intelligent. And when you get them talking about their story, their personal story, their career path, why they started their fund, why they believe it's different, they're almost embarrassed often to start talking about it. Yeah, because it's so, out of their comfort zone. But after a while, they really begin to own it.
Wow. So being able to tell stories and to adapt somebody's experience into a story or a narrative to help them in their marketing, I guess, did you see kind of a lot of light bulbs go off when you were doing that with them?
Yes. And I think probably initially I didn't realize what I was doing. Right. Which
it was so natural to you.
And people would say, my gosh, that fund that you're working on, it just started. It has no track record. It has $1 million of seed money, which is not a lot in that space to start with. And how are you closing all these deals? And I had to unpack it for myself because I was like, well, I'm not sure. It's just sort of, isn't this what everybody does? I didn't really understand that I was doing anything unique or different. And once I did sort of say, well, okay, this keeps happening. What am I doing? It truly is a system that we use, but the system begins with their story. And I think what's interesting, again, it's true for investment, portfolios and investors, but also in any business, that whole idea of the Rogers adoption curve, which most often is used with technology. But really, again, it's a human thing. The first part of the curve, those innovators and early adopters, they have to adopt you first in order for you to kind of go anywhere else, right, on that curve to get to the masses, et cetera.
Yeah, that bell curve, I remember. Yep.
Yes, and they care about the story. They don't need it to necessarily be perfect, whatever the it is. What they vibe on is a cool story that's undiscovered, that's new, right? They're the ones sleeping outside the Apple store. They don't really care that the phone is glitchy. They just want to have that new phone.
Yeah. They do it
And
for themselves. Yeah.
they do it for themselves. In our space, they do it for their clients to be able to say, like, I found you something you never would have been able to find on your own. And so the story is the linchpin of all of that. Mm-hmm. And if you extrapolate that beyond the investment industry, it's true for any business. The story is the linchpin, especially when you're starting.
Awesome. So you said, obviously, there's a lot of numbers in
Mm-hmm.
investments. I'll admit I was never really good at math. And then here you are bringing story into it. How are you able to make those two meet? And then what are the challenges that go with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, we talk to our clients about this exact thing. And I think it's even interesting to apply it, again, outside of the investment world. Mm-hmm. A really good story would have both, mm-hmm. right? So in the investment space, again, they report in numbers, and that's what matters, right? How much performance can I generate for you? What type of exposures am I taking, et cetera? What type of risk am I introducing? But even those numbers can have a story, right? Mm-hmm. So on a piece of paper, numbers are very, very flat.
Yes.
Right? And without getting in the weeds on some of the sort of jargon and statistics, in addition to sort of telling the story of the founder of the firm or the portfolio manager and why they've created the product that they're running, what problems they solve, et cetera, we then weave the numbers into it to say, okay, if you're vibing on all of that, and now we have to show you how this product fits in the lineup of strategies that you're using, we're going to now tell the story of the role we play, and we're going to weave those numbers in. Mm-hmm.
So do you start? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no. So you actually start bringing the numbers into the picture, mm-hmm. and it just gives the context. So where on a piece of paper the numbers are flat, if you can show someone in a practical way how they're going to be better either by solving a problem or harnessing an opportunity, and you have the numbers to provide that sort of valid, objective, quote, mm-hmm. data, then it's amazing, right? So, I mean, and if you think about it, like if I go to the hair salon and my stylist wants to, switch me from foils to balayage is much more expensive, up front, but I have to have that service less amount of time per year. Mm-hmm. So if she really wanted to tell me a powerful story, she could tell me the story of why balayage is great and why I'm going to look like, a supermodel when I walk out. But then she could also tell me, and it's going to save you money. And let me illustrate that with these numbers. And so the combination of those two things, the words and the feelings and the numbers, is really where the magic happens.
Awesome. So I'm going to go to my salon now and get the balayage
there you
treatment
go.
for what little hair I have left.
And you know what? The stylist, he or she, would probably be able to tell you why balayage is great, but I bet you they wouldn't talk about the numbers.
True.
Where our industry, they only want to talk about the numbers. In other industries, they never talk about numbers.
Yeah. True. So you don't hit them with the numbers first. You start with the story and then bring the numbers into it.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly.
So when you first started in investments and you wanted to kind of weave in a story, what was that like? Because, I mean, was there a lot of examples for you to do that in the investment industry, or were you kind of feeling it out as you were going?
Yeah, no, there were not a lot of examples. I think, it was like, I don't know.
I love your voice. You're like, yeah, no.
Yeah. I mean, and also like, because I came into the industry with no knowledge, mm-hmm. I didn't know that anything I was doing was, quote, wrong or right. Mm-hmm. I was just sort of being me. Right. Sure. And if I had some perspective coming into it, I probably never would have done this story thing, because I'd be like, oh no, that's not doing top numbers, right? But because I didn't, then I just went into it sort of sitting down with someone as a person, mm-hmm. and saying, tell me how you started your firm or how you launched this portfolio. And as they told me, and maybe it was over a glass of wine or a cocktail, but that became my sales pitch. Mm-hmm. And I sort of wrote it because it resonated with me. And I figured it's what I like to tell, and it's interesting, and maybe it will resonate with someone else. Yeah. And over time, again, I think when I started realizing, or maybe when people started saying, what are you doing? How are you doing this so well? Mm-hmm. And I had to really understand it more. Then I started to say, oh, there's a pattern to what I'm doing. But initially, I think it was just two people sitting down, having a conversation about their passions and what interests them. And that ended up becoming the stories I used in the sales and marketing effort.
Awesome. Awesome. So did anyone, and I'm not asking for specific names, but did anyone
Yeah.
kind of pull you aside and say, that's not how we do this? Did you have any experiences like that?
No,
Okay,
no,
good.
I didn't. No, but maybe they were like, "Oh, just let her do her thing. It's working." Like I don't know. It's very like she's a rebel, but let her go because somehow we're raising money.
Yeah. So then, when others saw it working, did you kind of start teaching them your way of doing it?
Yeah. So I think maybe exactly, and that hits on so many things. The agency model that we have, typically, if you were doing sales and marketing in the fund space, you would work for a company directly. And what we've done is say, we're going to actually stand here in the middle, independent, and pick funds that we want to represent because they have a good story and they have the good numbers, and we think they'll resonate with our investors. And so to answer your question, that teaching ends up happening because we're representing multiple funds at any one time. And every time we onboard a new client, this is part of the process that we really have to understand the story. In fact, the qualitative research that we do on our investment committee happens before the quantitative.
Okay. Huh. And so I guess, give me a brief overview of that, because it sounds like a lot of research that you have to do at the get-go, and obviously we don't have time to really get into the finer details of it. But could you just give me a brief overall overview of that?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great question because it forces you to think about who you're selling to or whom you're selling to, since we're writers here.
Yes.
And when you do that, when you really understand your target market, in our case, our target investors, then the lens by which you look at anything you're going to sell or market is colored by your tribe. And that's what you want, right? Yes. Because I have this match to make. And so when we do any research on a potential client on a fund, we have to look at it from the lens of the investor. And so that's really where it starts for us. We put ourselves in the shoes of the investor, and we try to stay in that seat through the entire due diligence process, and as we're developing the sales and marketing campaign. And so we'll ask the client to tell us their story, and they probably won't articulate it in a way, right? Because they've never done that. Sure. But we'll ask them questions and start to find the gems. And then we'll couple that with quantitative work that an investor would do as they were considering a fund for inclusion in their portfolio.
Do you usually find surprises during that qualitative review? You probably had some preconceived notions, and then you're doing research into the person. You're like, oh, I didn't know that. What's that like?
Well, it's probably just like when you meet someone new, a new potential friend or acquaintance, and well, I'm an introvert, so I won't speak for everybody, but as an introvert, that's always a little met with some trepidation, right? It's like, oh gosh, meet this person, and I go into it thinking, oh, I don't know, this story there's not really a story here. This is probably going to be a waste of their time and mine. And then you find out that everybody has a story. And as soon as that connection happens and you start realizing, wow, this person has a crazy story. This is awesome. I feel like I'm watching a movie. Where's my popcorn? And all of a sudden, you're so grateful for that conversation. And that happens to me almost every time.
Awesome. So in your space, the investment world, I've heard a lot of other sales thought leaders and marketing thought leaders. Neil Gordon jumps to mind specifically, and he said, you have to know your target audience's pain points very, very well, so that way you can speak to them in a way that you're going to help them. So then, my question to you: are there pain points unique to the investment world, and then how did you go about finding those?
It's a good question. And I think most people in the investment space would tell you that absolutely there's, very sophisticated and unique things that these investors are facing with, risk metrics and performance targets and yeah, you could make that case. But again, from where I sit, everything boils down to human nature. And there are sort of classic, problems that humans face. And it's not different if you're managing $1 billion portfolio or just trying to live your life, right? I mean, FOMO is a real thing. In investments, if people might not admit it, FOMO is the fear of missing out.
Oh, okay.
Right? Fear of missing out. I keep hearing everybody talk about this asset class that I don't have exposure to. And now I want to learn about it. I don't have it. It seems like a lot of smart investors do. This is going to cause me to start researching that space. The flip side would be managing for risk, right? And that's human nature too. Yeah. Like, okay, my portfolio looks like this. This seems riskier than this, and I have a lot of the risky thing. I probably need to do something about that. So to me, everything boils down to much more kind of classic human nature problems and opportunities. And you can add a whole bunch of investment gobbledygook around that. True. And we do.
Well, just the one piece of jargon you threw at me, the FOMO, I was like, I've never heard
and that's not even investment. That's like millennial. That's some kind of millennial thing. I mean,
maybe I missed the boat on that one.
I felt kind of hip saying it myself.
Well, I felt really old when you explained it to me.
Fear of missing out, real thing,
True.
thing.
I'm missing out now.
Yeah, you're gonna have to go read all the new things like Hey, Okay, Boomer, and all those things. Now,
I know.
Now
Okay,
we're
Boomer.
really feeling.
Yeah, the Ellen clip. I've seen those Ellen clips where they bring in a millennial and they try and have her dial the phone. And I had a rotary phone in my house growing up, so I knew exactly what to do. And it's hilarious watching them.
Oh my gosh, I know. God.
But you were talking about typing on vintage typewriters.
Oh yeah.
And that's more than what I would do because I love the keyboard and I love the sound of keys clicking. But on a typewriter, I think that's too much for me. I'm too impatient to sit there and do the clicking.
Oh, I wouldn't now. When I was young, I think it was like before like the Commodore 64 came out. This is like, we didn't even have a computer. We had this old typewriter. I mean, it's only vintage because it's old. It probably wasn't even cool. Yeah. But it was my mom's and I would sit there, you take this piece of like tape that was white out to, erase what you had typed. I mean, it was painstaking and that was my like hobby, I guess. One of them.
Wow.
Crazy.
That's true devotion right there that I don't have. But we grew up with an Apple II, and I think my parents still have that somewhere in their house, and it's fallen apart. They
should keep it because it's probably going to be like a museum type of thing at some point.
Yeah, and I remember typing on it, and it had the spring-loaded keys, so it was a nice resounding chunk.
Yeah,
chunk every time you did it. And I love typing on those even today because I guess partly for the nostalgia, but you actually have higher accuracy on those computer keyboards.
Yeah, you have like a feedback mechanism with the key.
Yeah, and you actually have to really hit it to make the keyboard register your letter and number, so that way you're less likely to get a misspelling because you're more deliberate
really
and methodical about it. Whereas common keyboards now are membrane based. So you get more spelling inaccuracies. So
that's really interesting.
Little nerdism there.
Hey, we're geeking out on typing. Don't mind us. Yeah.
Would you like to be a guest on the Career Challenges podcast? Go to careerchallengespodcast.com to find out how. While you're there, check out other episodes and download them through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, Castbox, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more. The Career Challenges podcast is hosted by me, Kyle Weckerly. I'm a certified professional ghostwriter who works with business thought leaders and industry experts to write polished manuscripts, assess their publishing options, and create book marketing plans. I've worked with consultants, high-ticket salespeople, coaches, speakers, C-level executives, and business owners. My authors have worked for USAA, Vistage, Booz Allen Hamilton, Austin Technology Council, and the John Maxwell team. My authors want to write a book to serve as a platform for their marketing endeavors. They know that becoming an author will help them secure speaking gigs, market their expertise, promote a product or service, and more. Are you ready to turn your experience, knowledge, and stories into actionable advice and connect with your ideal client? Then visit WeckerlyWriter.com to schedule a consultation today and begin your publishing journey. That's WeckerlyWriter.com. WeckerlyWriter.com. And now, back to the Career Challenges podcast. And I love doing that, but at the same time, I always have to pull myself back and do the professional thing and talk professionally on this professional podcast.
Yes.
So going back to your bio that I read earlier, and your history before you got into investment, it said you were an award-winning writer.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. So I think, again, I sort of fell into being an award-winning writer. Mm-hmm. I didn't set out to do that by any means. Mm-hmm. My first competition I ever entered was in high school, and my English teacher showed me the entry form, or whatever you want to call it, the description of the competition, mm-hmm. because she knew I had to pay for my school, and there was a purse. I don't know, it was like $1,000 or something. If you won for the state of Connecticut, you would get this $1,000 scholarship from the VFW. Mm-hmm. And the topic was, so it was the VFW Voice of Democracy competition, and the topic was my commitment to America. Mm-hmm. And you had to write an essay, and then you had to record the essay. Mm-hmm. And the competition, they judged you on the words and the delivery. Mm-hmm. And so, and it was regional, like it started in your town and then it went to your county and went blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And I just kept winning.
Really?
I won for the state. I got the $1,000, but then I ended up, going and competing at the national level. And it probably gave me, again, it wasn't intentional. It was more out of necessity that I entered. But once I did, I think it gave me the confidence that maybe I was good at this, that maybe there was some unique ability in me that related to storytelling.
Awesome.
So I probably would not have majored in literature in college. Maybe I would have, because I really did love reading. But I think it was that moment that said, hey, people, like, they're picking up what I'm putting down. Like, they're liking what it's not just me sort of talking to myself here. Like, this is resonating. And it felt good to be seen and heard.
Definitely.
And so I stayed with it. And through college, similar things would happen. A professor would enter something I'd written. They'd say, hey, I want to enter this competition. And I'd win. And so I'd like to say that it was very intentional and I was practicing and I was practicing because I was reading a lot and writing a lot for myself, but I didn't go into it with this idea of I'm going to become an award-winning writer.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think what a misconception that a lot of people have with introverts is that we don't want to be around people. And that's so far from the truth. I do want to be around people. I enjoy that human connection, but I want it to be a genuine connection.
Yeah.
When we talk, I don't want it to really be about frou-frou stuff like, did you catch the game last night? If I'm not invested with the team, I don't care.
Right.
I do have some friends who are very extroverted, and they can talk about anything and everything. And I think for them, it's really more about talking and, any sort of connection for them. Whereas for me, it's more of a genuine thing. And so I think with writing, and the vibe I'm getting from you too, is that, when you're writing, you're having a genuine connection or you're sharing something genuine about yourself that somebody else can read. And I think that's what's really great about that, and also about introverts, is that, we're really looking for a genuine connection, not just any connection.
So true. Very well said. And I think there are some books about introvert, like Quiet is one. Mm-hmm. One of the things they say is how you rejuvenate.
Yes.
So some people definitely rejuvenate by like going out with their friends and being in social settings, and that's rejuvenating to them. And some people rejuvenate by sort of going inward and reading or writing quietly, coloring or doing puzzles or typing in a vintage typewriter or whatever. And that's kind of one of the tells on whether you're an introvert or extrovert is how you rejuvenate.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And then another award that you had won that I'd read in your bio was the Barber Winder Award for Creative Writing. What was that about? What was that like? What was that about, actually? And then how did you win it?
Yes, same. I think it goes back to what we talked about. I can't remember that exact competition. I can't remember if it was an essay or a poem. At the time in college, I did a lot with poetry. Mm-hmm. And that was very interesting. I tend to be sort of verbose at times. I like words, and so I use a lot of them. Mm-hmm. Poetry is different because every word has to have such a unique role and a vital role, and my poems tended to be quite short. Mm-hmm. So I won some awards for poetry and some for, bigger essays. I can't remember off the top of my head which one that was. But I think that's an interesting juxtaposition of two very different styles of writing, and probably relates back to the sales and marketing thing, because obviously there are times where you need to be brief and concise, and there are times when, you have the opportunity to say more. And so that was an interesting practice in and of itself.
Definitely. So in your career in investing, what were some of the challenges that you faced, not just getting into it from a literature background, not numbers, going into a numbers field? And then you also mentioned you're in basically a boys club.
Yeah.
You're working with a lot of, just bros, I want to say.
Yes.
So what would have been some of the challenges that you have faced and navigated, and what have you learned from that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and a very true question. So let's see. When I started in the investment world, it was 1998. I had just graduated from college, so I was 21. So I was young, and I think there was a perception in investments. Not everybody held it, but it was there, that some fund managers would hire sort of like young, cute girls to sort of sell their stuff because we could get in the door and, whatever.
The pretty face.
Yeah.
The
pretty booth
face
babe, or like all kinds of like just BS things. Okay.
Yeah. Really,
so that
really
was
sexist stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And so that was there. And so I had a mentor who was great. She gave me this advice. So she said, okay, so you're young and you're cute, and everyone's going to think that you have no brain. And so the way you combat this is to make yourself not look pretty, essentially. Really? So she said, you can't wear your hair down. I had much longer hair than I have now. You have to wear it in a low ponytail, like, really low like this. You have to buy your suits from Brooks Brothers. You have to wear like pantsuits.
Does Brooks Brothers have suits for women?
I don't even know. I could have been buying men's suits for all I know. And let's just say that this was not the pinnacle of my fashion game by any stretch, right? But I was like, okay, I mean, I am smart, and I want people to respect me for my brain first. And so I'll do it. And, so I was 21 then, so I'm 42 now. And somewhere in those 20 some odd years along the way, I just started gaining the confidence and sort of losing the imposter syndrome, right? Imposter syndrome is a real thing, and I still battle it. I mean, definitely. Maybe I always will. But in those early years, when you don't have the credibility, I didn't have the reputation, I was trying to build it. As much as I hate to say it, this was the path, for me in this space, was to maybe not be myself as much as I could have been in order to highlight a certain part of my personality, which was my mind. And over time that changed. But, old habits die hard. It took when I started my own firm, which was in 2010, that was really when I started to sort of own my edge and own my uniqueness. And I remember when we were redoing our website, people said to me, well, like, what's your inspiration for your website? And, that you go through all these branding exercises. And I had this video that I wanted to share. And I was having this like internal battle of, am I really going to say this video that I want them to watch, which was an M&M, not the candy, the wrapper,
yes,
commercial for the Super Bowl, in which it was a Chrysler commercial, and he basically does this whole thing about Detroit, which is where he's from. And that video, I still can't watch that commercial without crying. Mm-hmm. It's such an underdog video. Mm-hmm. And if you watch that video and you look at our website, you will actually see the theater that's in the M&M commercial they put on their website.
I'm going to go back and watch that now.
Yes, it's an incredibly inspiring video. And of course, if you like hip hop, then there's more nuances to it. But it took me a long time to get there, is I guess what I'm saying. And now, I don't wear Brooks Brothers suits. Most often I wear jeans and heels and a blazer and a t-shirt. I wear hoops. I am 100%, or I try. I'm not 100%. I'm 90%, because I still have a little of that imposter syndrome. I'm 90% me. Mm-hmm. And, the message that we give to our clients is the same. And the message I give to my friends who are in business is the same, which is, while in the beginning I had to kind of dull my edges, now, and to have any success, in my opinion, you have to embrace what makes you different. And when you do that, you have to be willing to repel. In other words, someone might not like that I wear jeans and a blazer and a graphic t-shirt and heels and hoops. They might not like that. And that's okay, because that's me. And the people who do like that, those are my people. And if I'm not willing to repel, I'm not going to be able to attract. Mm-hmm. But it takes a long time to get there, or at least for me, it did.
Definitely. So between 1998 and 2019, what changes have you seen in the investment industry? Do you see more women getting into the field, and are they more or less themselves, quote unquote?
Oh, what a good question. The sad truth is, no, I don't see more women. I'm still very often the only woman at the table in the meetings. And I think in part the industry doesn't do a good job in general of illustrating what the paths are into this space. So like at our firm, and we work in investments, we have graphic designers, we have event planners, we have, sort of disciplines that maybe are more artistic or creative than quantitative. I think the paths and the jobs that exist in the investment world, there are many of them, but the perception is that the only ones relate to math. Mm-hmm. And so, there you have it. There's a lot of interesting books and articles about women-run funds, of which there are very few. Mm-hmm. But the funds that are run by women typically are very strong performers.
Definitely.
So I would love to see more. Yeah, I would love to see more. And I think what's interesting too, and I doubt anybody listening is like clamoring to be in the investment industry if you're female, but if I could give you sort of some perspective, now as I sit at that table, and I always do it just as like a touchstone, I'll look around and count, like, well, it's usually pretty easy because it's 0. But, how many women are at the table? And it's typically only me. But the thing is, I know, well, first I should say, for many years, the people at the table, those very successful, very intelligent, very wealthy men, knew I could help them. It took me a long time to know that I could help them. And now I feel very, very confident that I deserve a seat at that table.
Definitely. So if somebody's listening to this podcast right now, even if it's not a woman, and they're like, I really like what Stacy is saying here, and I want to do what she's doing, where could they start, and what other advice would you give them?
Well, call me. I mean, go to my website, my M&M video inspired website, get my phone number, call me. A. And B, I would say, if they're younger, just starting out in their career, there are associations of investment funds. You can ask, when you start asking questions of just people in your network, and the 7 degrees of separation, and getting into who knows somebody that works in the space, there are always so many jobs. It's a great industry in terms of connections. If you know somebody, everyone's always happy to give you a helping hand to get a meeting, or just like I said, call me and I'll help however I can. There's a great story by one of the best fund managers in our space. His name's Jeff Gunlock, but his story, he actually I don't even know if they make this anymore, but he went into the yellow pages and just looked at where are all the investment managers close to me, and I'm going to start, calling them. So I think there's lots of different, you don't have to do that anymore because we all have Google, but there's lots of ways to triangulate on it. But certainly asking people in your network and your family and your friends and extended family and friends, if they know anybody, I think people would be surprised how helpful the industry is.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, I'm writing that down too, because that's always good advice.
Just in case. Yeah.
Yeah. Just in case. You never know. You got to be prepared for these things. So you had mentioned, your love of reading. You would open books and type out of them. What are your favorite books, favorite authors that you want to share? And they don't have to be a specific genre. You can do fiction and nonfiction if you want. But what are your favorites?
So this was the toughest question on your list.
Really?
I was like, oh no. I mean, I started asking people what's my favorite book? And, it's just they're like, you want us to tell you your favorite book? Well, what do I talk about all the time? I mean, the first thought is what's not my favorite book? I love all books. But I would say by genre, fiction, I love Toni Morrison. I haven't read her in a really long time, but I love everything she writes. Nonfiction, I love Michael Lewis. I think he's an incredible storyteller.
Oh, yeah. The Art of Winning an Unfair Game, Moneyball. I have read that so many times.
Such a good storyteller. And what I like too is he, especially now in the seat that I'm in the investment world, he often touches that space, and he's a masterful storyteller, and character building is just amazing. So I love his books. Every year we sort of do a book club here, and I'm sure people are like, oh my God, here we go with the book club again. She's always got to have a book. But, whatever, that's me. And there's one book that everybody who joins Havener has to read upon joining. So it has to be my favorite in some way, shape, or form, right? Because it's kind of our flagship book. And that book is called The Go-Giver.
Oh, you're the third person to mention that. And that's on my list. I'm going to read it. I swear. It's on my Christmas list, so I can get it for Christmas. And I'm going to read it. I promise.
Okay. So what's cool about The Go-Giver? It's an incredible book. There's incredible lessons in it. But the way it's written, it's a fable.
Yeah.
And so the way that as a reader you receive the lessons and the education and the inspiration is through story. And I love self-help books. I mean, you can give me the 10 steps of whatever, and I'll read it. I'll consume anything, in any format. But there is something about the delivery of this book as a fable. And I'll tell you, I mean, when I first read it, I read it in one sitting, sitting in front of my fireplace with a glass of red wine and the break between Christmas and New Year's. And it's one of those books where you just you read it and you put it down and you go, yeah, that's life-changing,
Duh.
Yeah, of course. That's an incredible book.
So in the investment space, or I guess particularly for you and what you're trying to do at Havener Capital, are there any particular thought leaders that you like to follow, and why?
Ooh, what a great question. Wow. I mean, there are some incredible minds in the space. I mean, Ray Dalio just wrote an incredible book, Principles. It's kind of a tome. It's quite long.
Wow.
But I mean, even for people outside of the investment industry, I've heard that that's, on their short list as just a great business book. And then there's people that are fun to follow, not necessarily because there's kind of on the cutting edge of what's happening in investments, but they're just interesting people. Downtown Josh Brown is very, very interesting. He's got a podcast. He does some cool stuff. Like, I don't watch SportsCenter, but there's like the two opposing guys, and they each take a topic. Like, he does things like that.
Pardon the interruption, with Tony Kornheiser and Greg Wilbon.
Yes.
I think that's what it is.
Thank you. I'm glad you know it, because I can picture it.
When I was in college, a lot of the guys I was rooming with were sports nuts, and they would watch that. I'm like, these are just too. I have my opinions about that. I'm not going to say it anyway. I just didn't like it. We'll just leave it at that. Continue, please.
Yeah. So he does. He'll take like riffs on things that work in pop culture or whatever, and bring them into the investment space, which I think is interesting. He's very authentic. He's edgy. So he's always kind of an interesting person to listen to or read. And his business partner is a guy named Barry Ritholtz, who has a podcast called Masters in Business that's through Bloomberg. And that's really good. It's a lot of stories of how people kind of came to start their business and what they stand for. So that's good too.
Definitely. Awesome. So with what little time we have left on the podcast, what is next for Stacy Havener and Havener Capital?
Oh gosh, what a great question. I mean, so for Havener Capital, I would say you mentioned something early on, which was about teaching. You were talking about storytelling. You said, so do you like teach? Like, have you sort of spread this gospel of how to embrace storytelling in the investment management industry? And the answer was no. But the answer for the future is yes. Definitely. That is something that we really want to embrace. We're on a mission. The asset management industry, like many industries, is dominated by a handful of firms. There's the Pareto principle, which says 80% goes to 20% of the firms. In our space, it's 3% of the firms that have 80% of the assets, and that leaves a whole bunch of fund companies and businesses that are fighting to be seen. And we're on a mission to take 1% back from that group that's holding the keys to having all the cake. And to do that, it's a huge number. It's like, a ridiculous number. Yeah.
What would 1% be?
So
if you did all the math?
So 17 trillion is how big the industry is. So 1% would be 170 billion.
That's 1%.
Yeah. It's a ton. It's a ton. And so
I'm not good at math. I was thinking, that's going to be like 170,000 something. I was way off.
Right. So, for us as a firm, that's a huge challenge, because we have to, in order to hit that number, we have to be able to help a lot more funds. And the way to do that is, yes, we can go out and do it for you, but we can't do that for enough firms to make that 1% dent. We can, behind the scenes, kind of empower your salespeople to use our strategies and go out and do it, right? So we can power you, or we can teach you to do it, and then you can do it for yourself. And so I do think the teaching thing will be a big mantra for us over the next 10 years.
And will you be doing a lot of writing involved in that?
Yes. So I was going to say, I think for me, you absolutely read my mind. I'm really trying, and this is the introvert in me coming out, I'm really trying to step out from behind the curtain. So I'm very, very good at storytelling. I'm really, really good at telling other people's stories. I'm not as confident telling my own. And so this podcast is an incredible gift for me, because it allows me to share what I've learned and hopefully help people who need to hear those lessons. And I'm trying to step into my voice a little bit for 2020.
Definitely. Well, it's a great story, and I love the way you've been telling it, and I want to hear more.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Kyle. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the Career Challenges podcast with me today, Stacy.
Thank you, Kyle. It's been a pleasure and an honor. And if anybody, like I said, that comment about call me anytime is
Oh yeah.
a real
So how
comment.
can they contact you if you want to share that?
Absolutely. You can go to our website, which is havenercapital.com, HAV like Victor, ENER, and then capital.com, or you can put a link to it in your show notes.
I will, definitely.
Go there, grab our phone number, and dial. And I'll tell you, you get extra credit for calling, because I think that's a lost art, and it's so easy to hide behind email. So if you call, you'll jump to the top of the list.
Awesome. That's good to know.
Yes.
So, make sure you call Stacy Havener at Havener Capital.
That's right. Look forward to it.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you for listening to the Career Challenges Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and like the Career Challenges Podcast on your favorite podcasting app. Visit careerchallengespodcast.com for more information. Schedule your free consultation with Kyle Weckerly by visiting weckerlywriter.com today. That's WECKERLYWRITER.com. Thank you.